The city of New York blazed beneath the 47th floor like something out of a dream that refused to end. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, Arthur Sterling could see all of it. The Hudson River catching the last of the afternoon light. Yellow cabs crawling through Midtown like slow rivers of gold. Millions of people moving through their lives down below, completely unaware that the man watching them from up here had built an empire calculating their behavior before they even knew what they wanted. Arthur Sterling was 34 years old. He had been called a genius so many times the word no longer meant anything to him. The tech world called him the algorithm king because he could look at a broken company, a dying market, or a failing product and see exactly what everyone else had missed. He had turned 3 startups into billion-dollar machines before his 30th birthday. His net worth sat somewhere north of $200 million, and it was still climbing. Magazines wanted his face. Universities wanted his name on their buildings. People wanted to be near him the way people want to stand near a fire in the middle of winter. But Arthur Sterling was cold inside. He stood at the window with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and he did not look like a man who had everything. He looked like a man trying to remember why any of it mattered. His office was enormous and beautiful, clean white walls, a desk made from a single slab of reclaimed oak. Shelves lined with books he had actually read. There was nothing in that room that was there just for show. Arthur hated pretending. At least he used to believe that about himself. His phone lit up on the desk. Cassandra. He looked at her name for a moment before picking it up. Something in his chest did a small, quiet thing he could not name. He answered. "Hey, you," he said. Her voice came through bright and warm. "Are you still at the office? Tell me you are not still at the office, Arthur." He smiled. "Just finishing up." "Good, because the Meridian Gala is in 3 weeks and we still have not confirmed the table arrangements. Also, I need to know if you are wearing the navy or the charcoal suit because I already told Diane what color my dress is and we cannot clash." He listened to her talk. She had a beautiful voice. She always had. Clear and confident, the kind of voice that made people lean in at dinner parties. He had fallen in love with that voice 2 years ago at a charity event where she walked up to him and said his company's latest product had a design flaw, and she was right. That had impressed him more than anything in a long time. But right now, as she talked about table arrangements and suit colors, Arthur realized she had not asked him a single thing about his day. Not one question, not even a small one. "I will figure out the suit," he said. "Perfect." "Oh, and my mother wants to know if we are doing the engagement announcement in the Times or just social media, because apparently there is a difference and I do not want to hear about it for the next 5 years." "Sure," Arthur said quietly. "We will figure it out." After the call ended, he set the phone down slowly and stared at the skyline for a long time. The office door opened. Marcus stepped in. Marcus had been Arthur's driver and the closest thing to a trusted friend for nearly 8 years. He was a quiet man, practical and honest in the way that only people who have seen real hardship tend to be. He carried a folder of documents Arthur had asked for, but when he looked at his boss's face, he placed the folder on the chair without a word and waited. "She did not ask how I was," Arthur said. He was not speaking loudly. He was barely speaking at all. Marcus nodded slowly. "She does not always. Do you think she loves me, Marcus? Or do you think she loves what I am?" Marcus did not answer right away. That was one of the things Arthur valued about him. He never gave an easy answer just to fill the silence. Finally, he said, "I think she loves the life, sir. I think she believes that is the same thing." Room was very quiet. Arthur turned from the window. Something in his face had shifted. The uncertainty was gone. In its place was the same cold, focused look he got right before he made a decision that changed everything. "I am going to run a test," Arthur said. Marcus went still. "What kind of test?" "The kind that removes every variable except the truth." Arthur walked to his desk and sat down. "I am going to stage a spinal injury. My assets will appear frozen in a legal dispute. The penthouse gets cleared out. I move into the Lower East Side apartment I bought 2 years ago as an investment. To the world, to Cassandra, I become a man who has lost everything and cannot walk." Marcus stared at him for a long moment. "Arthur, I need to know, Marcus. This could destroy something real. If it is real, it will survive." Arthur's voice did not waver. "And if it does not survive, then I need to know that before I marry her." Marcus looked at the floor, then he looked back up. "How long have you been planning this?" "Long enough." "When does it start?" "It already has." 3 days later, Arthur Sterling came home in a wheelchair. The Lower East Side apartment smelled like old paint and somebody else's cooking from the floor below. The furniture inside was cheap and sparse. a second-hand couch, a small table, a lamp with a crooked shade. In the center of the living room, Arthur had placed one document flat on the table where anyone walking in could see it. A fake eviction notice. The final touch. Cassandra arrived 40 minutes after he did. She walked in wearing a cream coat and carrying an iced coffee, and for the first 40 minutes she was perfect. She held his hand. She said the right things. She looked at him with her beautiful eyes full of something that looked exactly like love. Then she stood up and walked slowly around the apartment. She looked at the walls. She looked at the floors. She pressed her lips together in a way that meant something she was choosing not to say. "It smells a little in here," she said finally. Arthur said nothing. "I'm sure it is temporary." She picked up her bag from the couch. "I have to go. I told my trainer I would be at the studio by 6. "You just got here," Arthur said. "I know, but I already paid for the session and you know how she gets." She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. Quick, light, the kind of kiss you give a child or a photograph. "I will call you tonight." She left. The apartment was very quiet. Arthur sat in the wheelchair in the center of the room and listened to the sound of the city coming through the thin walls. Car horns. A television somewhere above him. The hiss of a radiator. The noise of a world moving forward while he sat completely still. At 9:30 that night, the door opened again. The woman who stepped inside was not who he expected. She was maybe 26. Wearing worn sneakers and a plain uniform, carrying a mop bucket and a tote bag over one shoulder. She stopped when she saw him. She did not gasp. She did not stare. She just looked at him the way a decent person looks at another person and said, "I am Maya. I am on the night shift. I am sorry. I did not know anyone would be home." "It is fine," Arthur said. She nodded. She set down her things. She started with the kitchen. About 30 minutes later, she came back into the living room and set something on the small table beside him without making a big deal of it. A container of soup, still warm, a plastic spoon, a folded napkin. "I brought extra tonight," she said simply. "It is just chicken and rice, nothing special." She glanced at the window. "Do you want me to open that a little? The heat in these old buildings gets heavy at night." Arthur looked at the soup. He looked at her. She had already moved on and was setting up the mop like the soup was nothing. Like bringing food for a stranger was just a small and obvious thing that any person would do. "Yes," he said quietly. "The window would be good." She opened it. A thin thread of cool air moved through the room. She hummed something low under her breath as she mopped the floor, not performing, not trying to fill the silence, just existing the way a person exists when they are comfortable in their own skin. Arthur sat there and watched her for a long time. Cassandra had not texted back. 3 hours and nothing. He had built this whole test to catch a liar. He had planned every detail. He had thought he knew exactly what he was looking for. He had not planned for this. He had not planned for a nursing student in worn sneakers who brought him soup from her own bag and opened a window because the room was warm and asked for nothing in return. He had not planned for the way that small, ordinary kindness would sit heavier in his chest than anything Cassandra had said in 2 years. He looked down at the soup. He picked up the spoon. He had designed this test to find the truth about one woman. He had not expected it to find something else entirely. A week passed. Then another one started, and Cassandra's visits got shorter each time. The first few days after Arthur moved into the Lower East Side apartment, she came by every other evening. She would sit on the edge of the couch with her legs crossed and her designer bag in her lap, and she would talk, mostly about herself, about a brunch she had attended, about a friend who had said something thoughtless, about how difficult everything had become since the news about Arthur's frozen assets had started spreading through their social circle. She never said she was embarrassed. She did not have to. It was in the way she stopped mentioning him to people. It was in the way she had stopped wearing her engagement ring on days when she went out. Arthur noticed. He noticed everything. That was the thing about pretending to be helpless. Nobody watches you back. They just let their guard fall because they have already decided you do not matter enough to be a threat. By the second week, her visits had shrunk to 20 minutes, sometimes less. She would breeze in carrying a cup of coffee from the expensive place on Fifth Avenue, always just the one cup, always for herself, and she would sit across from him and look at her phone more than she looked at him. Once, when his wheelchair caught the edge of the doorframe as he moved from the hallway into the living room, she made a sound. It was small and fast, a short exhale through her nose, the kind of sound someone makes when a slow driver is ahead of them on the freeway. She did not think he noticed. He noticed, Then Julian Mercer walked through the door. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Cassandra arrived with him, which she had not done before. She said it casually, the way people say things they have rehearsed until the rehearsal disappears. "Arthur, you remember Julian. He has been helping me think through some investment options while everything is tied up." She smiled. The smile was perfect and meant nothing. Arthur knew Julian Mercer the way a chess player knows the opponent who has been studying their game for years. Julian ran a tech firm that had spent the last 3 years trying to chip away at Arthur's market share, failing every single time because Arthur was always 3 moves ahead. Julian was smart, polished, the kind of man who wore his confidence like a tailored coat. He walked into that small, bare apartment and looked around with eyes that were very good at hiding what they were thinking. He reached down and shook Arthur's hand. The handshake lasted 1 second too long. "Rough break," Julian said, and his voice was warm and full of nothing. "These things happen," Arthur said. Julian smiled. Arthur smiled back. 2 men in a small room, one of them pretending to be broken, and the other pretending not to be delighted about it. They stayed for 15 minutes. Cassandra laughed at something Julian said on their way out. It was the laugh Arthur used to hear when she talked about him to other people. The proud laugh, the one that meant she was showing off something she was glad to have. The door closed. The room went quiet again. That night, Maya arrived for her shift. She moved through the apartment the way she always did, steady and unhurried, cleaning without making a production of it. After a while, she sat in the chair near the window and pulled out a worn paperback from her tote bag. She was studying it for a pharmacology class. She had mentioned it once in passing, but she read out loud sometimes when she thought he was tired, just low and calm, not performing, just filling the silence with something human. Arthur closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He listened to her voice move through the words on the page, and he thought about Julian's handshake and Cassandra's laugh, and the way 2 people can share a bed and a future and still be strangers to each other. He thought about how long he had believed that what he and Cassandra had was real, and how strange it felt to sit in the wreckage of that belief and feel almost nothing. Not heartbreak. Something quieter and worse than heartbreak. The cold clarity of a man who finally sees the numbers for what they are. At some point, Maya stopped reading. She got up quietly and pulled a thin blanket from the closet shelf and laid it over his legs. She did not say anything. She just did it and went back to her chair. He kept his eyes closed. His throat tightened in a way he did not expect. Later, when he heard her gathering her things to leave, his phone buzzed on the table beside him. A voice note. He picked it up and looked at the screen. It had come through on his secondary number, a line almost nobody had, routed through his security monitoring app. He did not recognize the send error immediately. He pressed play. Cassandra's voice filled the small space of the room. She was talking fast and low. The way people talk when they believe they are alone. She was telling Julian that the documents were ready, that she could get him the Omega algorithm files, the full proprietary code sitting at the core of Arthur's most valuable technology before the end of the week. Her voice was steady, businesslike. She had thought this through. In exchange, Julian would move forward with a formal proposal. She would exit the engagement quietly. Her social standing would be preserved. His firm would absorb the technology and dominate the market. Clean, simple. She made it sound like a business deal because to her, that was exactly what it was. The voice note ended. Arthur sat without moving for a long time. He had built this test to answer one question. He had his answer now. But the thing pressing hardest against his chest in that moment was not Cassandra's voice on that recording. It was the image of Maya laying that blanket over his legs without a word, not because it was her job, not because she wanted something, but because the room was cold and he was in it, and that was reason enough. He looked down at his hands on the wheelchair arms. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dry. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. 1 ring. "It is time," Arthur said. "Book the Meridian Gala and get me my suit." Meridian Gala was the kind of event that Manhattan dressed up for. The ballroom of the Carlyle Hotel glittered from every angle, chandeliers throwing warm light across 500 guests in black tie, waiters moving through the crowd with silver trays, the whole room humming with the particular energy of powerful people who believed tonight was just another beautiful night. They had no idea what was coming. The word had spread through certain circles 3 days earlier. Quietly, deliberately, the way Arthur Sterling had always leaked information when he wanted it to travel fast. People were saying that Arthur, broken and desperate, was going to attend the Meridian Gala and appeal to investors publicly, begging them to release his frozen assets. It was a sad story. A fallen king crawling back to the table. Cassandra had heard it. Julian had heard it too. They had made arrangements with the gala's head of security. If Arthur caused a scene, he would be removed. Not roughly, just firmly and publicly enough that everyone in that room would remember it. The plan was clean. The humiliation would be final. And by the time the night was over, Arthur Sterling would be a cautionary tale people told at dinner parties for years. That was the plan. Arthur arrived late. He always did when it mattered. Marcus pushed the wheelchair through the side entrance. Arthur's head was down. His suit was dark and plain. He looked like a man who had rehearsed humility until it fit. People near the entrance saw him and their conversations dropped to murmurs. A few looked away. A few looked too long. Cassandra, standing near the bar with Julian, saw him across the room, and something moved through her eyes that she quickly covered with a slow sip of champagne. Julian was already scheduled to speak. He took the stage 20 minutes into the evening, smooth and confident, the kind of man who has given 100 speeches and knows exactly which pause gets the laugh and which one gets the silence. He talked about innovation. He talked about vision. He talked about the courage it takes to build something that lasts. And then he looked across the ballroom directly at Arthur in the wheelchair near the back wall. True leadership, Julian said, his voice warm and carrying, requires the ability to stand up, not just for your company, for yourself. He let the pause sit. A few people shifted in their seats. Some men, unfortunately, discovered too late that they never had that strength to begin with. Room was very quiet. Arthur raised his head. He looked at Julian for one long moment. Then he placed both hands on the arms of the wheelchair. And he stood up. It was not dramatic. It was not slow. He simply stood, the way a man stands after sitting for a long time on a long flight, straightening his jacket, adjusting his cuffs, rolling his shoulders back once. But the sound that moved through that ballroom was something no one in that room would forget. 500 people going silent all at once is not actually silence. It is something heavier. It is the sound of a story turning. The wheelchair sat empty behind him. Cassandra's champagne glass slipped in her fingers. She caught it. Her face had gone the color of old paper. Julian stood on the stage and said nothing because for the first time in a very long time, Julian Mercer did not know what to say. Arthur walked forward. His footsteps were steady across the marble floor. He reached into his jacket pocket and drew out his phone, and he pressed one button. The large presentation screens mounted on both sides of the stage flickered to life. Security footage. The Lower East Side apartment. The date and timestamp visible in the corner of the frame. And Cassandra's voice, clear and clean through the ballroom speakers, laying out her arrangement with Julian. The files. The algorithm. The proposal. Her voice echoing off $500 million worth of chandeliers and crown molding. The room did not explode. It went still first, the way water goes still for just a moment before the current takes it. Then the whispers started, rolling outward from the center, and within 30 seconds the noise in that ballroom was a living thing. Julian stepped back from the podium. He was still holding the microphone. Arthur stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at him. "I acquired your company this morning," he said. He was not using a microphone. He did not need one. "Effective as of 9 o'clock. The board accepted the offer last night." He paused. "You work for me now, Julian, although I suspect you will not be staying long." Julian set the microphone down. A security guard appeared at his elbow, but this one was not Gala's security. This one was Arthur's. Cassandra moved toward the exit. 2 more of Arthur's people met her at the door, politely, professionally, the way he had done everything tonight. She said something. Arthur did not hear what it was, and he did not try to. He was already turning away from the stage, walking back through the parted crowd, past the tables with their centerpieces and their half-eaten appetizers, and their stunned and fascinated guests. He walked past all of it and pushed through the door that led to the service corridor behind the ballroom. The corridor was narrow and bright with fluorescent light. It smelled like dish soap and warm food, and the specific exhaust of a kitchen running at full speed. Catering staff moved in both directions with trays and supplies. And there, near the far end of the corridor, standing against the wall in a pressed catering uniform with a tray balanced in both hands and her eyes wide as he walked toward her, was Maya. She had not known he would be here. He had made sure of that. She stared at him walking toward her on 2 feet, and he could see the exact moment it hit her, All of it at once, the wheelchair, the weeks, the soup she had brought from her own bag, the blanket she had laid over his legs in the dark. Her mouth opened slightly. The tray shifted in her hands. Arthur reached her and took the tray from her carefully. He turned and set it on the counter beside them. Then he turned back and looked at her. Her eyes were filling. She was fighting it, pressing her lips together, blinking. Her hands were shaking a little at her sides. "Owe you a bracelet," he said quietly. A tear broke loose down her cheek. She shook her head. "You do not owe me anything." "I owe you everything," Arthur said. And he meant it the way a man means something when he has spent years being careful with words and finally runs out of reasons to be careful. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. Then she put her hand in his, and he led her through the service door and back into the ballroom, the two of them walking through the crowd together while 500 people watched and understood, in the way people understand things they did not see coming, that they were witnessing something real. At the center of the room, Arthur stopped. He did not reach for a microphone. His voice was enough. "Sterling Foundation is being established tonight," he said to the room. "Its mission is to fund medical education for young Americans who cannot afford it, and its inaugural chairwoman is Maya Chen." Maya stood beside him with tears still on her face, and her catering uniform still on, and her whole life turned upside down in the span of 5 minutes, and she looked at him like he had lost his mind. He smiled. It was the first real smile he had felt in months, because Arthur Sterling had built his entire life on calculating the odds. He had tested everything. He had trusted nothing. He had looked at every person who came close to him and tried to find the angle, the motive, the hidden cost. And then a nursing student in worn sneakers had brought him soup from her own bag on a cold night and covered his legs with a blanket and asked for nothing. Not a thank you, not an explanation, not even a second glance. He had designed his test to find a liar. What he had found instead was the one person in his world who had never once tried to calculate what he was worth. That, it turned out, was worth more than everything else combined.